Okay, welcome to the last session for today. The next talk is by Milena Sereikaite.
That's Sereikaite.
Sereikaite. Floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about strong versus weak definites, and I will talk about a distinction that Florian presented to you yesterday. And for this distinction, I will provide evidence from Lithuanian adjectives that seem to have two forms, a beer form and what I will call a long form that has a suffix that seems to be related to definiteness. Okay, so in this talk, I will briefly introduce some theoretical background on strong versus weak definites. Then I will turn to main claims. Then I will talk about typology of yes, which is the suffix that seems to be associated with definite expressions. And then I will turn to intellectual paradigm and distribution of the suffix, and I will talk about strong versus weak environments. We will think about the possible construction of noun phrase and what do adjectives tell us about what happens to definiteness in Lithuanian in general. And then we will finish with implications and further work for future. Okay, so all of us know that we have two kinds of definites. Florian explicitly presented them yesterday, so I'll just briefly mention them here. We have strong definites based on familiarity. Basically, we have a definite expression whose interpretation is dependent on the previous expression that has indefinite meaning very often. Then we have weak definites licensed by uniqueness. So those expressions have unique properties, and those expressions are unique in a certain set of possible worlds. So we can divide languages into two types. The first type, is like German and Icelandic. Those languages have a weak versus strong distinction that is overt. And here, let's say in German, we can have a definite article D that contracts with P, which is a preposition. And this is a weak article. And we can also have a strong one where the article does not contract with P. The second type is, the second group of languages is something like a Kan, where we have a beer form, and then we can also have an overt form. So we have a beer nominal, and we have also a full determiner with a beer nominal. So today, I will, in this talk, I will propose that Lithuanian actually belongs to the second group. And we have beer non-MPs that stand for weak, and we will have beer non-MPs plus a definite morpheme that stand for weak, strong articles. Okay? So further split that has been proposed by Jenks in 2015 is for weak definites in larger situations. We can have here definite, general definites and specific definites, and evidence for this comes from classifier languages. General definites are licensed by general world knowledge. Specific definites are licensed by specific contextual restrictions. As we will see later in this talk, this distinction will be really important for our adjectives. So Lithuanian is a Baltic language. There are only two Baltic languages left, which is Lithuanian and Latvian. Lithuanian has 3 million speakers. We don't have definite articles, but we have suffixes like yes that seem to be associated with definiteness. So this suffix attaches to non-MP categories, like adjectives, for example. So adjectives can appear in two forms. So one form, what I will call here a short form, and another form is a long form. If you take a look at number 1, in 1A we have beautiful, and for beautiful over here we have feminine singular nominative, and this is a short form. There is no suffix. For long form, we have a definite suffix over here, and I translated these as in 1a as a beautiful girl and 1b as the beautiful girl. I followed this translation from traditional grammar book. That's basically what most grammar books will tell you. However, in this talk, I will argue that short form like graži, which we just seen a couple of seconds ago, can be definite. And these forms are used to express weak article definites. And then we will also argue that long forms like gražioji with e over here, pattern with short definites, with strong definites, as evidenced by familiar definites uses in certain bridging contexts parallel to determined data. Okay, and the last important thing that we will propose here is that larger situations where most of the time we will have weak articles in German, well, in Lithuanian we can see that we have both forms, a short form and a long form. And these two forms seem to present two different readings. So the general definite and the specific one. Okay, so these were main introductory remarks. Let me now turn to typology of yes. So this suffix can appear on a number of different types of categories. So like participles, ordinals, personal pronouns, interrogatives, superlatives, demonstratives, you name it. So there are plenty of them. In this talk, I will just mostly focus on adjectives. Hopefully, by the end of my PhD, I will be able to tell you what the other long forms mean. I don't know yet. But yeah, I think this is really impressive paradigm, and all of the long forms deserve proper investigation. So beer forms, beer adjectives and suffixes are both have inflections. So let's say if you take a look at the first table, which means for jaunas, which means young. If you take accusative, you have jauna. For long form, you have jaunaji. So ye is also inflected for number, gender, and case, the same as jauna. The glide disappears over here for some kind of phonological mechanisms that I'm not going to talk about here. The second important point is that in table 2, that suffix yes directly mirrors the third person personal pronoun, yes, which means he, and ye, which means she, which also have long forms. So if you take an accusative over here, ye, which means him, if you want to have a long form, you just reduplicate it. And this ye appears on jauna as well. So that's interesting. And it seems that many years ago, we used to have simply just adjective and then pronoun and a noun, and the pronoun used to have some kind of relative pronoun function. If you want to know more about it, you can take a look at Appendix 3. So important also that we never have this definite on noun. But however, we can have two forms with two long forms. So what I've seen so far, it seems that if we have two adjectives, one of the adjectives seem to refer to kinds, and it's very interesting. However, in this talk, I will mostly focus on instances with one adjective and leave aside the combinations with two forms. So if we think that this indeed is some kind of a definite morpheme, we can just simply place it in D, and then we could say that whatever modifies a noun, this thing just sticks over a noun. This could be preliminary structure, but of course, we still don't know what's happening. So for the rest of this talk, I will just simply introduce the definite features of this suffix, and I will turn to actual examples about on adjectives. Okay, so what is special about these adjectives? Well, it seems that the short adjectives, like German weak articles, are felicitous in the part-hall bridging context. So in bridging context, what is specific about this context is that we have a definite expression, and that definite expression is related to an indefinite one in an indirect way. If you take a look at example 4, you can see something, I brought my car into a repair shop to change a couple of its parts. Now the new engine works great. So here I have a whole entity, car, and then I also have the part of this car, which is a new engine. And over here, I simply use a beer form. So now you may wonder what happens if I use a long form. Well, in the long form, the presence of a long form in part-whole bridging context yields a familiarity reading. So in this case, let's say we have a context. Let's say we have Jonas had talked to Petras about this new great engine that he bought. However, the new engine broke down, and a week later, Jonas went to repair it. Now the new engine works great. So in this context, I can see something as in number 5. I brought my car into a repair shop to change a couple of its parts. The new engine now works great. The new engine, no yeses, is a long form, and it has and it's possible only in this context where my hearer has some knowledge from before about the engine. Okay. We have product-producer bridging environment as well, and here we can have a strong article in German, and respectively we have a long form available. So as in number 6, we bought a new avant-garde painting. For the merits to avant-garde, the young artist received the premium. So here we have a young long form, young, and this is a producer, and producer refers to the product, and the product here is painting. If we have a short form in 6, it only has an indefinite reading, which is incompatible with this context. So then for Jonas, for short form, it means that basically we talk about the artist, that it's not the producer of the product, which is a painting in this case. That's pretty interesting. And we also have familiarity, and familiarity definites are referential expressions licensed by an anaphoric link to preceding expression. This is so-called strong familiarity, as mentioned by Roberts in 2003. In German, familiarity requires a strong article, and in Lithuanian, we simply have a long adjective. So in number 7, you can see something like, I have bought a new car. However, Jonas did not like the new car. And in order to say the new car in the second sentence, we use a long form with a definite suffix over here. For short form, it introduces a new referent. So noja automobili, new car. In 7a, in 7b, it's just simply impossible. It sounds really strange if you just use a new car without the long form. Larger situation uses license weak definites and permit only weak articles in German. Both types of Lithuanian adjectives are available, but associated with different readings parallel to reports from numerous classifier languages. So the short form stands for unique individuals licensed by general world knowledge, whose specific identity is not yet established or known. So in this context, imagine that this is the evening of elections, and no one knows who is going to be the new president. And the Prime Minister says something like, the things that our president did will not need to be done by the new president. And new over here just simply occurs in a beer form. Interestingly, a larger situation uses the long form, refers to a particular unique individual in a specific context known to the interlocutors. So after the elections, the new president called the city mayor. So here the new is in a long form. And so we already know particularly who is going to be the new president. And this is still a unique individual. So this is nicely relates to Jung's generalization and shows that not everything is so crystal clear. So short and long form seem to work in the distinction between strong versus weak articles, but here we have a mixture. Okay, so what does this study tells us about definiteness in general? Well, this study provides novel evidence for the distinction between strong versus weak definites by showing that this distinction is not necessarily reflected in determiner patterns, but can also be detected in adjectival system. Lithuanian provides evidence for further distinction within the paradigm of weak definites environment. Specific versus general, which are overtly reflected in the language. Beer forms which lack a definite morphology but have a weak definite reading potentially give evidence for a null D layer. Lithuanian distinguishes between long and short forms of demonstratives and pronouns, so further research is needed to assess the nature of these forms and their relation to the analysis of short versus long adjectives. So far, it seems when I looked at long demonstratives and long pronouns, they seem to have some kind of contrastive meaning, which is very different from, of course, long adjectives. So it would be interesting to see how they pattern in general. And my upcoming work argues that MPs syntactically have DP properties, so Lithuanian more or less work like Bulgarian and unlike Serbo-Croatian. Despite the lack of articles, this gives support for BRMPs and a DP layer. And I would like to thank Florian, of course, for great suggestions and comments. Also, many thanks to Jeremy and also the audience at the lab meetings at Penn. Thank you.
Okay. Plenty of time for questions.
Well, thank you. Could you go to slide 15?
15.
I was wondering here, in the case of familiarity, if it was possible to have only the article without the noun, without the noun phrase, and making reference to the whole thing. Like if you were saying, I have bought a new car, however, Jonas did not like the new one, or something like that. Is it possible to have it?
Yeah, it's possible if you have a long form.
Yeah, I mean, using the long form
but not
without
a short
the noun.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So Romanian, and I think also Greek, also exhibit definites on adjectives. So you can say something like, pretty the girl, right? You can say something like that, pretty the girl. And I was wondering whether your Lithuanian data could be supported by an account where you have an agree mechanism. So whether what's happening with the adjective is that the definite determiner that surfaces there is actually agreeing with the definite determiner upstairs, or do you think it's introduced there?
Oh, do you mean so whether it agrees? Oh, okay. I'm not sure yet, but it's simply what I have is like always attaches to anything that is a modifier of an MP. It could be lowering. I'm not sure yet, but I remember Neuer's on Ambix paper on like Bulgarian, so they analyzed this as lowering.
Okay, thanks.
And just to kind of follow up to that, what happens when you stick a degree modifier in? So if you get the ending on both the very and the adjective, then it might look more like a concord kind of situation.
So like if I have very, for example, it's very interesting that it blocks, so I cannot have very, a long adjective, and a noun. But on the other hand, if I have a demonstrative, very, and adjective, the suffix surfaces on demonstrative. So that's very interesting. But yeah, I don't know yet what happens, but it seems that it blocks at the lowering or whatever you call it, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So if you have nouns without adjectives, what kind of determiner system, if any, does Lithuanian have?
Yeah, very good question. So we use demonstratives. So let's say I bought a new car, that new car, or that car. You can use also possessive pronouns like my car. And yeah, so this is ambiguous over here. You could have some extra context saying, like, let's say having a relative clause after this of the car to specify that you're referring to that car.
But can you have bare nominals or?
You can, but then you have to provide extra information, like sort of bought a book, let's say. Book is great. Yeah, you can have book is great, but yeah, it's possible.
Have them with indefinite readings, just bare nominals. I bought book or I saw horse. It would also be bare and indefinite.
Yeah.
All of that. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
More questions? Can I ask what happens with only and superlatives?
Superlatives, they can have long and short form too. I haven't figured out what the long form means yet. I only saw a beautiful girl. It seems that its pattern is the same with those beer nouns. Like I only saw a beautiful girl, the beautiful girl. Both of them seem to work fine.
How about she's the only girl in the class? Something like that. Or, yeah.
So we have adjective for only.
Sorry, the only girl in the class raised her hand, something like that.
The only girl in the class raised her hand. We just have a simple adjective and then followed by, we have the only girl. There's nothing special happens there.
Okay.
No, we don't have that long form for only, like only as an adjective itself.
Okay.
So maybe it's it has like a short long form mixture itself. I don't know.
Okay, so that supports the analysis where it is a strong. It indicates this. It's like a strong definite.
Yeah, it seems like. Yeah.
Because that would be a case that would require a short form in German, right? So that would be one of these like inherent uniqueness cases. I was also wondering about the sun, but you don't modify the sun.
Mm-hmm. But maybe in some forms they can have both. Like the only it seems like it's like an adjective and it doesn't have a long form, so it seems that it just functions for both long and short form at the same time. So maybe that's another group of adjectives that could be added to the system.
Okay. And what did you say about superlatives? Is there anyone? Oh, sorry.
So you can say the best girl or the best long form girl. You can have two forms.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, this is a bit of follow-up to your son thing, because I was wondering whether, this is all restrictive modification, so what happens when you have non-restrictive modification and you have the beautiful son, or something like this?
You have a beer short form, like if you just say beautiful son.
And this is what happens with most evaluative predicates, probably, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I think in Serbo-Croatian, but Milo, you should say, there is also this contrast between long and short form, which is very similar, and Branimir Stankovic has written stuff about it, so maybe you want to look into that and see if there's some.
Right. Yeah, I hear that like a lot of people argue for specificity for long forms and Serbo-Croatian. I read some articles, so I think that will be a follow-up after this to see whether we have specificity here. But it's interesting to see that we have this contract that relates to German. Mm-hmm.
Shows up on the demonstrative.
Right.
The demonstrative, when demonstrative precedes the adjective, did you say something like that?
Yeah, so like I mentioned that when we have very, let's say, you could, and if you want to have long form, so you have that very beautiful girl, the long form, in the only place where it's available is on demonstrative, but not on the adjective. So it cannot be lowered down to the adjective because very seems to block it.
So yeah, nothing like that happens in supercreation. So this is like a really crucial difference.
Oh, okay.
So
I
it's
see.
always like it's really part of the inflection, the distinction between
Oh, okay.
definite and indefinite, you know, or specific, or non-specific, whatever you want to do. Yeah.
Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
The next speaker is Eva Irani, also known as Ava Irani. Apparently, these two pronunciations are in free variation.
I'm special. One name wasn't enough for me, or so my parents thought. Anyway, before I start, I wanted to say two things. Firstly, this is ongoing work with Florian Schwartz, so thank you, Florian. And also, thank you to everyone here for sticking around for the last talk of the day. So before we go into talking about the two types of definiteness in American Sign Language, we need to discuss some properties of a certain index marker that's used. So here we have ASL that makes use of an index marker to make reference to entities, among other things. So an example like in 1, it's Sarah and Stacy are friends and she likes her. Now, if I were to sign this sentence, first of all, I would be using my signing space. And this is where I inform you guys that you will unfortunately have to, move your attention from my wonderful, wonderful slides to me occasionally to see me sign these sentences. So here's my index marker. It looks like this. Here's my signing space. Now, if I were to sign this sentence, I would first have to fingerspell Sarah and Stacy. So I'm going to do that now. This is Sarah. I'm going to assign her locus A. This is Stacy. I'm going to assign her locus B. And now I can say the two of them, by referring to their loci, are friends. And now I can point to locus A and say A likes B. And that would translate to Sarah and Stacy are friends. She likes her. So what we just saw here is that each locus is associated with an entity, and to reiterate the other way around, we have that a signer can simply point to a locus as opposed to reintroducing the reference here. So I didn't have to sign Sarah or Stacy again over and over in my signing space. I can simply refer back to their loci. Another way you can use this index marker is something like in 2. So I can say, when someone lives with someone, the former loves the latter loves the former, and now I will sign these sentences. So you can say, when someone, that is bound to happen, lives with someone, so it's locus A and B, you can say A loves B, former loves the latter, B loves A, and that's the latter loves the former. Both fine. And unfortunately, they're making me use this mic. So, continuing, those two are acceptable. However, I can't do something like the former loves the former or the latter loves the latter. I can't just refer back to it, saying something like, I love myself. That doesn't work. So the index marker just can't refer to entities, but it can also refer to propositions. So in this sentence, get a job or go to graduate school. The former I can do, but the latter, that's impossible. Well, I wish I listened to this guy before. Anyway, but let me sign this sentence for you so you can see what it looks like. So something like get a job, A. B is go to graduate school. B, I can say former, I can do. Second one, impossible. And that's what the sentence would look like. So now that we have established the properties of this index marker, I'm going to give you an overview of the rest of the talk. So first, we're going to go into some background on previous work on the ASL index marker, because unfortunately, I'm not the first one to talk about it, even though I would have very much liked to be. We're going to talk about some work that talks about the index marker as a definite article, and there's some more current work that argues for the analysis where it is a demonstrative. And then we're going to move on to the two types of definite articles that you have heard so much about in this workshop. Following that, we're going to go into the core proposal. I'm going to talk about arguments for the index marker as a strong definite article, bare nouns as weak definite articles, And then, because there's been arguments for the index marker as a demonstrative, I'm going to compare the index marker to other demonstratives in the language. And then we'll happily conclude so everyone can go and enjoy a good drink. So, some background. I'm going to go over some tests that I'm sure everyone is familiar with, but just to make sure we're all on the same page, I'm going to go over them again. So these tests were described by Schwartz in his work, and among others in previous history. So we're going to talk about some anaphoric usages, like John bought a book and a magazine. The book was expensive. I'm not talking about any other book. We can talk about immediate situation instances, like the projector, when it's uttered in a room with exactly one projector. Coincidentally, like in this one. We can talk about larger situation definites, so something like the president, when uttered in the United States. We all know who that is for now. Then we move on to some bridging cases, and we've seen these cases, exactly these cases, yesterday. So you could say John bought a book, the author is French. Here, the author and the book are related. John's hands were freezing as he was driving down the street. The steering wheel was bitterly cold, and he had forgotten his gloves. We've also seen that. And here, the steering wheel is referring to the car that he was driving. So. Now we're going to move on to previous analyses of this index marker when it occurs before an NP. So along the lines of Bahan et al. 1995, they have argued that the index marker, when used before an NP, is a definite article, and they do so on the basis of examples like in 4. So when we look at 4, we see John is looking for a man to fix the garage. Here it's a non-specific man. However, if I sign it like the way it's up there in 4, so back to the signing. So John, he's looking for point man to fix his garage. Now, if I point before man, it's infelicitous, because here it means I'm looking for a specific man. I'm pointing to that man that I'm looking for. If I wanted to make this sentence felicitous again, I would just leave it out and just sign John is looking for a man to fix his garage, and that would be totally fine. More current work argues for the index marker before a noun phrase as a demonstrative, and this is Kalidarova and Lila Martin in their forthcoming work. So we know that covariant readings are unavailable with demonstratives, and they show that it's unavailable when the index marker is used in certain examples. So let us all now go crazy with our imaginations and imagine a rigged race where the team in red always wins, and the person in red always wins. So when I say it in English, the person in red always wins, it could be anyone, right? Today, John ran a race because he was wearing red, he won. Tomorrow, Milena ran a race, and she was wearing red, so she won, so on and so forth. That's a covariant reading. But when it's a referential reading, you say that man won the race, or that person won the race in red. It refers to one person. So in ASL, the same holds. When you sign it, point person in the red shirt tends to win. It only refers to one person, so the referential reading remains, but not the covariant reading. On the other hand, the covariant reading is present when the index marker is absent. So I can say the person who has the red shirt, that person tends to win. And then it's fine, you get both readings. So the index marker is also infelicitous in definite environments, or at least in these type of cases. So we have the sentence, today is Sunday, what should I do? I'll go to church and see the priest. Here in the church, there is one unique priest, so this should be fine. It is in English. But we see here that in ASL, it's not so great in this case. So I'm going to sign that for you to see what it looks like. Today is Sunday, what should I do? I'm going to go to church, and I'm going to see point priest. When I point, it's infelicitous. If I leave the point out, it's totally fine. Foreshadowing my analysis, I would like to point out that here the index marker for priest is used without establishing any locus for it. And that will be important for the analysis, so I would like to point that out right now. Moving on to a brief review on the 2 types of definite articles that I'm sure no one here needs, but please humor me. So Schwartz demonstrates that the distinctions between 2 types of definite articles, weak ones licensed by uniqueness, strong ones licensed by familiarity, are found cross-linguistically. So we've seen them in German. Oh, and here's some examples of them. Weak articles licensed by uniqueness, something like in 7. I won't be using the blackboard today. Again, one blackboard in the room, or the most salient one. Strong articles licensed by familiarity. So like in 8, I bought a book. The book was interesting. And has been shown for languages like German that this distinction manifests in 2 overt forms. Work on Akan, Thai, and among other languages show that some of these languages realize this difference as an overt form for the strong definite article and a bare noun phrase for the weak definite article. Some examples, we've seen this one again yesterday in the talk that we all loved so much. So here is a part-whole relation. It is a weak definite environment in German, and you can say the sentence, the fridge was so big that the pumpkin could easily be stowed in the crisper. Here, point out the crisper is a part of the fridge. In German, the contracted form is the weak definite article. The non-contracted form is a strong definite article. And as we can see in red, that the weak form im is used and is okay, but the non-contracted form in dem is infelicitous. In contrast, when you have a product-producer relation, it is a strong definite environment, and here you would prefer you would use the non-contracted form, and the weak form is infelicitous. So the play displeased the critic so much that he tore the author to pieces in his review. Well, here the author wrote the play, product-producer relation, and he used the strong form. Moving on to a language more similar to ASL, or exactly similar to ASL, I will argue, is Thai. Here you have a part-whole relation. It's a weak definite environment. The car was stopped by the police because there was no sticker on the license. License is a part of the car. And we would expect that a bare noun show up there as a weak definite article, and it does, using the classifier is infelicitous, as you can see in red, right here. So moving on to a strong definite environment in Thai, we have the sentence, Paul thinks that the poem is beautiful, although he doesn't really like the poet. Here, you would need to use the classifier, and that is the overt strong article. With that in place, we can move on to the proposal of this talk. Although there are some similarities between the index marker and demonstratives, I argue that there are also differences between them, and they differ exactly in the key respects as talked about in Schwartz's dissertation and further work. The index marker combined with an NP and referring to loci is argued to be a strong definite article under my approach, and weak definite articles in ASL are expressed as bare NPs. And this analysis isn't new or isn't novel in any way. It goes along the lines of Heim 1983 in stating that indefinites introduce reference in the discourse and definites refer to familiar reference. So the index of a definite has to be in the domain of the assignment function, but the index of an indefinite does not. And in sign languages, these indices are seen in the signing space. So when I sign them out for you, you see them play out. The distinction lies in whether or not the index has been introduced in the discourse. The spoken languages and sign languages have the same core properties, but the indices are visible in sign languages. And this analysis is not incompatible with other work on ASL, for example, Schlenker 2010, 2011, other works of his. So this is evidence for the index marker as a strong definite article. Here it is necessary in certain instances of bridging. Here we have the poet and the poem. This is a product-producer relation. You have John doesn't like the poet, but he likes the poem. If I sign this, point, poet, point, assign an index for John. John doesn't like the poet, but the poem, point, poem, John likes. We also see evidence for bare nouns as weak definite articles. So the index cannot be used in weak article environments with unique reference. Instead, we have bare nouns. So in a sentence, in a question like 14, what is the capital of France? We all know there's one capital of France. So it is infelicitous to have the index marker before capital here in this sentence. Furthermore, weak articles are used for part-whole bridging, and ASL requires bare nouns in these cases. So we see here the car was stopped by the police because the mirror was broken. Again, mirror is a part of the car. And here, when you sign this sentence, you must have the index marker before mirror. Otherwise, you must not have the index marker before mirror. If you use it, the sentence is infelicitous. So we see so far that this pattern's exactly like Thai, as I showed you earlier. There is no difference between the two. But because the claim is that the index marker is like a demonstrative. I'm now going to introduce a demonstrative that people have already claimed to exist in the language, and it's the demonstrative that's often glossed as that. It looks like this. This is the hand shape for it. And we know, and we see that the bare nouns in the demonstrative that in ASL, which looks like this again, can refer to unique reference that are merely present in context, but this is not a property that holds for the index marker. So let's take a look at 16. In order to talk about 16, again, I would like you all to imagine the right context for it. So I'm standing with Milena, my good friend, who just gave a great talk at a cafe, and we're waiting in line for our coffee, as good coffee addicts do. And in front of us, we see this man being loud and obnoxious with the cashier. He's loud, he's screaming. And at that point, I can turn to Milena and sign 16A in 2 ways. I can sign, turning my back to the man because I don't want him to see and yell at me. I can sign man, annoying. Bare noun phrase, that's fine. I can also sign that man, annoying. That's also fine. What I cannot do is use my index finger and point in neutral space and say, point, man, annoying. That's totally out. Moving on, we also see that the differences between the index marker and the demonstrative that can be seen in cases of bridging. So let's take a look at this example in 17a. John bought a book in a magazine. The book was expensive. Let me sign that for you. So John, he bought book, point for the magazine, and you can say point, book was expensive. That's totally fine. And here, the second index marker refers back to the book that I established in locus A. However, if I replace the index marker with the demonstrative that, the sentence is infelicitous. So just like in English, John bought a book in a magazine, that book was expensive, unless there's an emphasis on that, it's pretty bad. So in ASL, if I signed John, he bought point book, point magazine, that book was expensive, it's infelicitous and not possible. Demonstratives, unlike the index marker, are also not available for other cases of bridging. So here we see John bought a book, the author is from France, and you have, in contrast, John bought a book, that author is from France. You can see 18b is ungrammatical, but 18a isn't. So let me sign that for you just so you can see what that sentence looks like. So John bought point book, point author is from France. 18b, John by point book, that author from France, that's out. Okay. So in conclusion, finally, since the index marker parallels with the strong article in many cases, and we saw the differences between the index marker and demonstratives in the examples that we just talked about, I argue that the index marker is best analyzed as a strong definite article. We also saw evidence for the bare nouns patterning with weak definite articles, and we see in ASL that the discourse reference are borne out more clearly and transparently in the signing space. So instead of articles, we have old and new references, a reference translating to whether or not a point in signing space has been previously used or not. So on that note, thank you, everyone. Yes, and Samuel reminded me that if you want to sign the deaf way, it's like this.
Okay, but don't do that.
So I have a friend who works on sign language, Jeremy Kuhn, and he recently wrote a dissertation on some of this stuff, particularly stuff called functional readings. And at least my feeling, I don't exactly remember most of his contrast, but I felt like he analyzed these as more pronominal. And I was wondering if that's true, then you should expect to be able to get them without the noun, and is that possible?
So I'm not a native signer by any case, and I don't have the data for you, but the argument alongside the argument that the index marker is not a definite article was the argument that the index marker is not a pronoun. So that's the next step of the argument. So in short, I don't have an answer for you now, but hopefully I will in the near future.
Cool, thanks.
So a follow-up on that, you know how Oprah does, you win a car, and you win a car, and you win a car. I'm wondering if you can do that with girl wins a car, and girl wins a car, and girl wins a car in sign language, and whether you use the index or the demonstrative or null. So you might not know, but you know, like, this is something to test, because if you use the demonstrative, then fine, that's pronominal. But if you use the index, then that could be pronominal, you know, because it's deixis and...
I think that should be fine.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think that's possible in ASL.
Any more questions? Very convincing. It's hard to think of it.
Two quick questions. Do you have evidence, so in the bridging context, you know, the book, for instance, can you show that the pointing is not a possessive? So it's not book his, but it's book
Yes,
it?
because
Okay.
the sign for his is this.
Okay. And the second question is, all of the occurrences of that you signed were in, they were grammatical in neutral space and ungrammatical in loci? So is it the case that must always be signed in a neutral space?
No, it's not.
Okay.
But I only used it in relevant cases where I needed to compare it with the index marker, but definitely not. But just to add to what I'm saying, people gloss this as that, this hand shape as that, and it might be other properties. So that's something to be aware of.
Do you have a contrast between this and that?
You only have that, and this is just pointed close to you. So if something is in your actual physical space, you can point to it. Otherwise, you would use loci.
I obviously want to know about only and superlatives.
Sorry, did you ask what only?
Yeah, have you looked at those?
This is only. And I don't know how it would be used in any of these contexts, but yes.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you.